This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
What? What? Go!
All right. How's everybody doing tonight? Doing good? I promise it's there the first time because I watched it back too. How many of you have ever failed to notice something obvious? Like, I'm pretty sure everybody's hand should be raised because it's easy. It's really easy to be focused on one thing so much that we completely miss something happening right in front of us. Just like that right there. You're focused on the team in white, and you don't even see the black bear come through there and moonwalk. Some other examples. How many of you, be honest, how many of you, because you guys are way more into your phones than my generation, how many of you have ever been texting and walked into a wall or a person or... Right? So maybe also, maybe you've been so like into this book or this video game that you really like that you completely disregard the fact that your mom or dad's been calling your name for the past like 10, 15 minutes. That was for real me growing up.
I do that with my wife now.
That might be me now.
Yeah, I do that now.
D could say, but I just zone out. I get into the game and I'm done. But my very favorite that happens to me all the time, I'm not going to lie, is you're looking for your phone or your keys and you've looked everywhere that you can think of. You've been looking for like 30 minutes only to realize that it's in your hand.
Yep.
Like, I have for sure done that before. And so tonight we're starting a new series and it's going to be talking about the things that we notice. And we're also going to be talking about the things that we fail to notice. And so those examples that I mentioned, some of those, walking into a wall might literally hurt, but sometimes our lack of attention to important things can have big consequences. Sometimes our lack of attention to important things can have really bad consequences. And so, have you ever been so focused on yourself? So maybe you're just focused on how good you look. Maybe you're focused on the bad stuff that's going on in your life. Maybe you're focused on your needs that you completely missed something that was happening in someone else's life. I think we could all say that we've been there before. And over these next few weeks, we're going to be talking about what it looks like to take our focus off of ourselves long enough to see the needs of others. We're going to be talking about what it looks like to take our focus off of ourselves in order that we are able to focus and see the needs of others. And the reality is that there are people all around us each and every day who are going unseen. There are people around each and every one of you each and every day who are in need of help. Maybe for some of you, it's the guy in class or on your team or at work who looks like he has it all together on the outside, but really on the inside he's torn up because he's dealing with his parents' divorce. Maybe it's the girl at lunch or the girl at the coffee shop who you assume is just quiet because she likes being by herself, but really she's so lonely and she just needs a friend. Or maybe for some of you, that person, maybe it's a close friend of yours who is so outwardly positive, they're friendly, they're outgoing, they're that fun person that everybody loves to be around, but on the inside, they're actually super anxious. On the inside, they are so scared that people are going to recognize how anxious and how depressed they are. So all of these, obviously I made all of these up, but guys, each and every one of us in this room, we are surrounded by someone who probably fits in one of those categories. We are surrounded by people who are hurting. We are surrounded by people who are in need, and too often we fail to notice that because we're so caught up in ourselves. We're caught up on this project that we've got to get done. We're caught up on our AP class because it's so difficult. We're caught up in work because we need money. And we fail to notice the needs of some of our very best friends. And today, we're going to be talking about a story that actually is the opposite. We're going to be talking about someone whose life was fixated on noticing the needs of others. Now, can any of you take a wild guess and tell me who we're going to talk about? Jesus. We're talking about Jesus. So Jesus, what I want you guys to recognize is Jesus wasn't the only religious teacher of his time. There were tons of people who were teaching. You had the Pharisees, you had the Sadducees, you had the priests. There were tons of people who were teaching at the same time as Jesus. Jesus stood out. And the reason that he stood out is that when he showed up, he didn't just teach. When he showed up, he didn't just teach, but he healed. You see, from the beginning, Jesus' priority was not just spiritual needs, but he focused on the physical needs as well. Jesus healed the sick. He raised the dead. He cast out demons. He fed hungry people. He befriended those who were lonely, and he helped those who were in need, and he taught his disciples to do the very exact same thing. And so we're going to be in the book of Mark, chapter 6 tonight. And so what we're going to find is right before we pick up, Jesus has sent his disciples on what is basically a short-term mission trip. So Jesus has sent the disciples out, and basically the instructions that he has given them is go wherever you can go wherever you're needed, go wherever the people will accept you, and when you get there, preach, heal the sick, cast out demons. That's what he tells them to do. Go and help people. Go and see those who are in need. And that's what they do. And so then they return, and that's where we're going to pick up in chapter 6, starting in verse 30. And this is what it says. So the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." And this is the disciples that it's talking about here. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. So they get back, they kind of have their debrief. The disciples have told Jesus about what they've been doing, and what Jesus hears and what Jesus finds out is that they have been super busy. They have been so busy, and they're exhausted, and what he notices is that they haven't even eaten. They haven't eaten, and they're exhausted, and so Jesus wants to meet their needs. So he's like, hey guys, let's go off to a desolate place so that you can rest, so that you can get some food. And then we'll continue in verse 33, and it says this, "Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things." So we see here Jesus starts out, he sees the needs of his disciples, he's going to take care of his disciples. But then this crowd sees them, and when crowds saw Jesus, they wanted to be around Jesus, because Jesus didn't just work on the spiritual. Jesus fixed their physical needs as well. And so when crowds saw Jesus, they flocked to him. And so Jesus is off to take care of his disciples, and this crowd comes to them. And you notice, Jesus doesn't say, hey guys, I'm taking care of my disciples right now. I'll get to you in a minute. No, what he does is he notices the needs of this crowd, and he meets those needs. And then we'll pick back up in verse 35, and it says this, "And when it grew late, and his disciples came to him and said, 'This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat.' But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" So, we don't really know. Obviously, we're not there, so we don't know their attitude right here. What we do know is that they were exhausted. And it could very well be that they're just trying to get all these people to leave so that they can get a break. They're trying to get all these people to leave so that they can finally get some rest. But another option is that maybe they were doing exactly what Jesus taught them to do. Maybe they're doing exactly what Jesus taught them to do, and that is to notice the needs of others. Because we do see, they said, these people are hungry. They noticed that these people were hungry. And that was a good start. For them to notice that these people were hungry was a good start, but it seems that they had missed something. Because yes, Jesus does want them to notice the needs of others, but what he wants them to do even more is he wants them to do something about it. He wants them to do something about those needs, and the disciples needed that reminder in that moment. And I think more times than not, we need that same reminder because we live in a culture. You guys have grown up in a culture that screams at you, "Me first." This culture that we live in is all about gratifying ourselves. It's all about our needs, what we want. And we get so focused on ourselves that we fail to see the needs of the people right in front of us. We fail to see the needs of the people right in front of us. And you see, Jesus, if you claim to be a Christian, you have made it your mission in life to live like Jesus. So let me tell you a little bit about how Jesus lived, because Jesus never once lived a me first life. Jesus never once lived a me first kind of life, because Jesus, from the beginning of his entire life, we find him teaching in the temples when he's like 12 years old. Jesus, from the very beginning, always lived an after you kind of life. And so we fast forward several years after this event with the disciples, several years after Jesus has died and he's rose from the dead, we meet this guy named Paul. And so Paul, a little about him, he was a murderer, killed Christians, persecuted Christians. He meets Jesus and completely changes his life, completely turns his life around. And after Jesus, he devotes his life to the very same message that Jesus taught. And that message was after you. And so if you're familiar with the New Testament, there are lots of books that end with ends. So like Ephesians, Colossians, Galatians. Today we're going to be in Philippians. So most of those books are letters that were written by Paul to churches in those areas. And so we're going to be in Philippians chapter 2. And we're going to read verses 3 and 4. And this is what it says. "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." So, we've already said it, it's natural. We are humans. We have been taught. We have been conditioned. It is natural for us to look out for ourselves. I stand here before you today, and I admit it is 95% of the time, I am probably looking out for me because it's just what comes naturally to us. But we need a reminder to stop being so me first. We need that reminder to stop living for ourselves. And that's what Paul is telling us to do here. He's saying, don't think about yourself. He's saying, don't think about yourself, but do take an interest in others. He's saying, don't be so obsessed with your own needs, but instead do notice the needs of others. And you see, Jesus and Paul, they're living this exact same life. They're preaching this exact same message. And that message is more than don't be selfish. The message of Jesus and the message of Paul is more than don't be selfish. That message is bigger than just not being selfish. Because you see, living like Jesus, it's not enough to simply not be selfish. Because you see, Jesus, he went a step further than not being selfish, and he was selfless. Jesus was selfless. So, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a selfie. So, y'all ready? Don't get too excited. Middle schoolers were like all jumping up here. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right. So, we took a selfie. Probably one of the most selfish things we can do in this life. So, most phones now, even like flip phones. I had a flip phone that did. Most phones now have a front-facing camera. Logan's is a robot phone. You can't even see his camera until he pushes a button. But anyway, so most phones now have a front-facing camera. Does anybody know the original purpose of the front-facing camera? It was not to take a picture of yourself. Would anybody else like to try? Taylor wants to. Nope, it's not to check your nose either. So, the original purpose of the front-facing camera was FaceTime. So the original purpose, the reason they put a camera on the front of your phone was so that you could video chat with people, so that you could make video phone calls. And now, probably 99.9% of the time, it is used for selfies. It is used to make sure you don't have a booger or to make sure you don't have broccoli in your teeth. Like, that is what we use. So this thing that was created to help two people connect, this thing whose original purpose was to help people to connect with one another, has now become something that is used to just glorify ourselves. And I'm not saying that selfies are bad. Like, I don't think that selfies are bad, but it's just another example of how easy it is to become so focused on ourselves that we forget to notice others. So the question for us tonight is, how can we be less selfish and more selfless? Well, selfless living starts with noticing others' needs. Selfless living starts with noticing others' needs. And the way that we notice others' needs is the very first thing that we have to do is we have to look. You have to look up from your phone or whatever distracts you from noticing the people around you. When you're around other people, be intentional about noticing and really seeing them. Because we are surrounded by people who are longing to be seen. And once you've looked, well, then you've got to discover. Once you've looked and you've noticed something, it's time to get curious. Get curious about those people that you've noticed. Ask them how they're doing and actually listen. Now, I want you to hear this right now. I think a lot of times when someone asks me, hey, how are you doing? And I say, I'm doing good. How are you? I really don't care how they're doing. I think most of the time we say, how are you doing? Just because it's what we're supposed to do. That's the polite thing to do. But what I'm telling you tonight is that when you ask somebody how they're doing, when you ask somebody what's going on in their life, actually listen to them. Don't just ask it because you want to pretend like you care about them. Because if you don't care enough to actually listen to them when you're asking them those sort of questions, don't talk to them because you're wasting their time. So you have got to listen to people. You are never going to notice things that people are dealing with if you don't listen to them. And once you've looked and once you've discovered the things that they're dealing with, then it's time to do something about those things. Once you discover the needs in someone's life, then do something about them. You see, Jesus, he taught his disciples, he commanded his disciples to notice needs and to do something about them. And just like the disciples, you can help people. You can act when you find out there is a need, and you can serve other people. So my hope throughout this series as we go through these next several weeks is that you will start to look and live more like Jesus. My hope is that you will begin to look and live more like Jesus. And living like Jesus, like we said, is not just not being selfish. Living like Jesus is being selfless. It's putting others before yourself. It's putting others ahead of your needs. It's putting the needs of others ahead of your own. And it's actually doing something about those needs. Because if you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the first 4 books of the New Testament, Jesus' entire life, everything that Jesus did was about showing people over and over again what it looks like to live a generous, compassionate, and selfless life. And that is what he's calling us to do. And if you live an after you type of life, if you live that selfless life like Jesus lived, it's not only going to help the people around you, it's not only going to change the lives of other people, but it's going to change your own life. It's going to change the way that you see other people. It's going to change the way that you communicate with Jesus and you have a relationship with Jesus. It will radically change your life if you will only begin to start recognizing that we have got to stop focusing on ourselves and focus on other people and their needs. So this week, I want you guys to make it a point. To notice as many needs around you as possible. Make it a point to notice as many needs around you as possible. I want to challenge you to notice. I want to challenge you to look and to discover and then to do something to live like Jesus and meet those needs. I want you guys to really start caring about the people around you. Guys, some of us in this room right now, we're so caught up in ourselves. We're so caught up in what's going on in our own lives. We don't even recognize the things that our very best friend is going through. And that's because we're selfish. And Jesus is asking us to be selfless. And that selfless living starts with noticing others' needs. Let's pray. God, I thank you for God, just all that you do for us, God. I thank you for the selfless life that you lived, God. God, the life that you gave on the cross for each and every one of us in this room, God. There's none of us in here. No matter how selfless we can be, none of us in here could compare to you, God. So we thank you for that. And I pray for each and every person in this room, God. God, that you would help us to recognize those around us. You'd help us to see the needs of those around us, God. That you would help us to not just see those needs, God, that you would help us to do something about those needs. God, I pray that each and every person in this room, from the youngest to the oldest, God, would recognize that it's not, God, it's not just about not being selfish, God, but we have got to put others before ourselves in the very same way that you did, God. And I pray that you would give each and every one of us the courage to do that, God, and the courage to recognize that, God, when we see those needs, we can do something about them because, God, you don't call us to things that you're not going to help us with. So, God, I pray that you would give us the courage to recognize that and that we would begin to take our attention off of our own selves. We begin to stop focusing on our own needs, God, and we would begin to focus on the needs of those around us. Some of us in here don't even realize what our very best friends are going through, and it's because we're so consumed with ourselves. And so, God, I just pray that you would help break us of that. God, we love you. We thank you for everything that you do. It's in your name we pray. Amen.